Hey guys, thanks for watching my video. So I decided instead of talking about gender-based violence in my summer field placement of Liberia, I decided to go with a group of people that I will likely be working with upon graduation. Um, to better educate myself and better prepare myself for the work. So, my research is on gender based violence against Native American women on U.S. Indian reservations. And this is a very prevalent problem, but also a very hidden one, which is unfortunate. So, 34% of Native women are raped in their lifetimes, and 39% are victims of domestic violence. This prevalence is especially high among Alaska Native women, and the rate of forcible sexual assault is over 10 times the national average. And the missing and murder rate of Indigenous women in the U.S. is also alarmingly high, but they are not very well tracked. And so a nonprofit just created a database to keep track of all the missing and murdered women on Indian reservations just last year. So, again, a pretty hidden issue. Another kind of alarming fact that I found was that most sexual violence with Native women is by non Native men. And this is super problematic, especially at the systemic level. So Native American reservations actually have restrictions for prosecuting, and so they cannot prosecute non-Native peoples that perpetrate on their land. And so these cases have to be tried under state jurisdiction. And so obviously that there's some power that's lost there and some equality that's lost there. And then also less than half of those cases result in guilty verdicts and subsequent punishment. And then there's a huge lack of U.S. attorneys who will take on sex abuse cases against Native American women. And so the consequences of this include severe underreporting. Native women feel, I read that they don't think that they'll achieve justice, and so it's kind of a why bother mentality. And then also Native American women are on reservations are being seen as targets, and a lot of them see themselves as targets. And so there's, again, this severe lack of power and severe lack of rights that's contributing and perpetuating this cycle of violence. Another form of gender-based violence against this group is reproductive rights. So back in the 70s, there was a protest called Wounded Knee, and it was protesting the severe lack of rights and protection and funding for U.S. Indian reservations. So the government wasn't really providing much support, and so there was a protest. Following this protest, there was a huge spike in Native women being sterilized without their permission and without their knowledge. And this caused lots of cultural shame and guilt. So I read this really interesting article where Native women consider themselves, they consider reproduction really important as a part of continuing their cultural heritage. And they especially find this important because of the historical trauma and how much genocide happened historically, and they feel this pressure to continue their cultural heritage. And when they don't have that power anymore, there's a lot of shame and guilt and kind of defeat. So change and ways to address this need to happen, kind of both at the local level with those local interventions, but also we need political and social efforts to promote equality, to promote truth and reconciliation, and to promote rights. So I'm going to talk about 3 interventions and 3 projects, and critique them and I have a tweak for one of them. So the first one is from the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. So it's a nonprofit in New Mexico aiming to stop violence through support, education, and advocacy. And they have a specific project called the Policy Advocacy Project, and it's meant to increase tribal representation in historically underrepresented spaces, specifically to advocate for Native women and spark conversations about violence and prevention. So it's great that this advocacy and representation is happening because we need that political change. My critique is that I think it needs to happen on a larger scale. So this is only happening in New Mexico, which is really important and a great start. But I think there needs to be more of this happening at the national level and more focus by this organization perhaps to do more of that large scale change, and also more partnership with men in power, because unfortunately most people in power are men, and then even most natives in power are men, and so there needs to be more of that partnership work to for men, those men in power, to be able to help with that, help break that cycle. The second intervention is from the New York State Coalition Against Domestic Violence. It's an organization in Albany, and it partners with local service programs to address domestic violence. So their project is the Domestic Violence and Indigenous Peoples Project, and what it does is it provides training, listening and counseling, and then resources to local domestic violence service agencies with the goal of increasing the service provider's capacity to serve the needs of Indigenous women. It's hailing outside, so I apologize for the background noise if there is any. But yeah, I think it's great. What I like about this program a lot is that it's based on research, a ton of research, huge body of research, and then also involvement of key informants and then cultural brokers. So most tribes from New York State had an input in this project, which is super necessary. But I think my critiques about it is that it doesn't really serve programs that help with men and perpetrators to change that culture. And then there's also research on legal advocacy, but then there's no partnerships with advocacy groups. And so we know from the research and the history that legal support is so crucial, and there's such a severe lack of it. And so I think they could definitely improve their services by partnering with advocacy groups so that they can be better equipped to provide that advocacy that's so heavily needed. The third is the Native American Women's Health Education Resource Center, and that's a nonprofit that serves the Yankton Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. And they specifically have a weekly open group called Batterers Intervention Program, and it's an open weekly meeting for Native and non-Native men. And what it does is it's educational about domestic violence and breaking the cycle of violence. And so they cover culturally adapted topics on individual respect, fatherhood and roles and attitudes towards women and themselves. And so we know that involving men is so important for changing the culture and breaking the cycle. So that's great. The culturally adaptive topics are great. It's great that it's run by a Native man, and then the program has input from Native women. So that cultural representation is also great. But I think their problem lies in their recruitment strategy. So I think calling it a batterers program, there's kind of a stigma around the word batterers. And so how is that going to negatively affect buy-in potentially? And then kind of just the stigma around going. So what does that mean if you go? What does that mean if other group members see you go? What does it mean if the community sees you go? Things like that. And then my critique on all three is that there's nothing in any of these programs, and none of the programs that I was looking at that address the reproductive rights protection piece, which we know is definitely a problem and has been a problem in the past. And then there's nothing to address the historical trauma or really that truth and reconciliation piece that's so important to like address just the historical inequality that's contributing to the violence against these people. So my tweak, I decided to tweak the batterers intervention program a little bit. So one thing I would do is change this title to make it less stigmatizing and a bit more inclusive, especially of men who maybe witness domestic violence going on but are not perpetrators or batterers themselves. And so I came up with the names of like Men Against Domestic Violence Group or Leaders of Peaceful Communities, something like that. And then changing the recruitment strategy. So maybe instead of just having an open group, they could partner with places of employment, such as businesses, and then hold workshops with kind of that basic education piece to kind of get people's minds going and understanding what domestic violence is, what it means, and like what it might mean for them. And then, so then from there, they can talk about the group and kind of advertise it, and then there could be a way, maybe an email or something like that, for people to kind of more anonymously or confidentially express their interest, and then to kind of continue to ensure that confidentiality, not advertising kind of the place and time, so it's advertised kind of right there on the website, and so maybe when those people reach out, then the location and the time is given so that it's a bit more private and less stigmatizing. Yeah, so that's kind of my tweak. But so when doing this project and kind of thinking through this and thinking about my future work potentially on an Indian reservation, I have recognized and been thinking about the fact that I share the cultural and social identity of the historical oppressor. And I've benefited from the oppression against these groups and the violence against these groups. And so I've been thinking a lot about what that means for me as a researcher, what it means for me as somebody implementing and tweaking some of these programs and critiquing, and then somebody providing direct services. So that's something that I'm definitely going to continue to think about and continue to integrate throughout this thought process. So thank you guys so much. I clearly went over time, but a lot of you guys did too, so I don't feel that bad. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of it.